So, are we ready, team? Yes, cool. Good evening, everyone. My name is Denis Stolyarov. I'm an assistant curator here at Pushkin House. Thank you for joining us here tonight. I'm really glad that we are hosting this event. So that's the second time we are organizing, that we collaborate with Index on Censorship. And it is very sad that they have so much material in relation to Russia to cover, but I'm really happy that they're here to do this amazing job. And last time we organized a launch of an issue dedicated to Russia, but unfortunately due to the heat wave, it was moved online. So now is the first in-person event, and I'm really happy to be here and to be part of it. And of course, today we are welcoming Martin Bright, editor-at-large of Index on Censorship, and Zinovy Zinik, a great friend of ours. We have a lot of books in our bookshop by Zinovy, and Zinovy has published a new translation of his story in Index on Censorship. And also, Zinovy has published a new book in Russian last year, and due to very friendly people at NLO, Novella Literaturное Обозрение, the publishing house in Russia, who are great and who have published Zinovy's book, they managed to deliver them here, and they took all the costs, they paid all the costs, the delivery costs themselves. We are really grateful, and that allows us to sell the books at really retail price. So if you read Russian, I think Pushkin House is the only place you can get Zinovy's book in London. So thank you, and join me in welcoming Zinovy and Martin.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So yes, I'm Martin Bright. I'm the editor-at-large at Index on Censorship. Very pleased to be here today to be talking to you about Zinovy's work, his life, and the story that he has kindly written for us. Is that better? Yes. Sorry. And of course, Index on Censorship, if people don't know, was set up 50 years ago specifically to print and publicize the work of dissident writers, initially behind the Iron Curtain and then wider around the world. And so in the present situation in the world, it almost seems like we've come full circle, and that we've come back to our roots in the work we're doing today in Ukraine, in Belarus, in Russia, and wider, Afghanistan, Myanmar. But we're here today to talk about the work of Zinovy. And I should declare an interest. Zinovy published in the 1980s this book, The Mushroom Picker, which was celebrated, very much celebrated at the time, and then was made into a BBC TV series. And as a young journalist, it was one of the first novels that I was asked to review, working in fact for a little tiny magazine based a couple of streets away from here in Museum Street, a little magazine called Publishing News, and I was paid £5 a shot for little 100-word previews of novels that were coming out. And I'll always remember reading this novel and the delight that it gave me and the insight that it gave me into the world that Zinovy was part of. I've said in my introduction in Index on Censorship that Zinovy Zinik is not easy to define. I mean, those of you who know him will know that. But I went on, of course, to try to define him. So what I said was this. He's a Russian novelist and short story writer who's written all his best-known works while living in exile. He writes mainly in his native language, but sometimes prefers to express himself in English, as in his master's voice, the story in this issue of Index on Censorship. He was able to escape the Soviet Union to Israel in 1975 because of his Jewish family origins. His family name is Lutzberg, but he was not brought up in the Jewish faith. As an opponent of the regime, he had his Soviet citizenship stripped from him, but dislikes the term dissidents. So I think you'd agree, bit of a tricky character. Of course, in my attempts to define Zinovy, I got it completely wrong. And I received an email from him immediately after publication of this, saying, well, Martin, I do understand Index's alertness to the notions of dissent and exile and the necessity of headlines to draw readers' attention, but there's a degree of confusion in this vocabulary. I was not a Soviet dissident in a sense it used to be understood in Europe and the USA. The words such as artistic underground could be closer to the true picture, but not entirely applicable. And needs a lot of modifications, clarifications. While in Soviet Moscow, I just tried not to be involved with the Soviet system as much as I could. And the first given opportunity, when for pecuniary reasons, the authorities had allowed Soviet citizens to join distant relatives abroad, I got away. I knew that my citizenship would be taken away from me, but that was my aim, to get rid of my Soviet past. I didn't want to belong to the world of Soviet Russia. In that sense, I'm not an exile. Never in my 5 decades of living outside Russia I have ever wanted to return. I am not an expat because I'm not a Russian citizen. I left Russia to start a new life in a different geography and in a different language. It does go on. I mean, essentially, I got it completely wrong. Anyway, I tried my best, and I will try again this evening. And I suppose, in a sense, Zinovy, the first question I wanted to ask you was, clearly from reading your work, I mean, you'll probably correct me in this, but you have almost an obsession with the question of identity. You keep returning to it. So could you possibly, I've just read out your quick email to me, but could you perhaps explain a little bit about where you see yourself as an artist, where you see yourself as a writer in I suppose, with reference to these notions of dissident, exile, expat that I got so wrong?
Well, I've written about 18 books, I think. It's been published. And
can people hear?
Do you hear me? Yeah. Yeah, it's about 18 books I published. It's been published, and 3 of them I wrote in English. So it's very difficult to summarize this. They are all more or less deal with this question of identity for a very simple reason, because when I talk to a person, it's just the second question is, where do we come from? So I assume it would, this question would chase me to my grave, basically. Where do I come from? And but of course, when I lived in the Soviet Union until I left when I was 20-something, 29 actually, I never thought about it. So the question starts when you leave your motherland, or fatherland, as German would have said. And it's all inevitably, this question has to deal with your attitude to your past. And I happened to be, I confronted this question first, of course, in Jerusalem. I landed there in 1975, and luckily my friend Slava Zuckerman, who was a filmmaker, eventually created a movie, punk movie, called Liquid Sky. This is a cult movie, still could be seen in New York. He helped me greatly because he gave me his business, his job of running student theater. I still can speak Hebrew. I do forget from time to time this word or that word. I still can read it. And it's, so I immediately got involved in what's happening in Israel, but not the real understanding of what was about the conflict, which haunts us all nowadays. But my first station they could address is the problem that I face, that is how to deal with my Moscow past. And what's happening with the people who arrived there is they basically, roughly speaking, in reference to this question, they deal to those who totally deny their Russian past, a kind of Zionist attitude of deleting what you had experienced in your previous life, and now you're new man in the new land. Others got absolutely stuck in the moment in the past when they left Russia, in my case. And it's a general problem, really, with anyone who actually left his, not necessarily country, it could be who left his wife, and cannot come back, who left the room and then the room got completely destroyed. I mean, it's just the person who actually cannot return to his past. And I've written a novella called short novel, called The Notification. It is about a person, an immigrant in Israel, in Jerusalem, who is actually indeed stuck in his past. And I was inspired by one of the fairy tale that one of the had most powerful influence on the rest of my life. It's a fairy tale quite famous. I don't know, you probably know it. It's by Wilhelm Hauff, a German writer of early 19th century, who's created enormous number of fantastic Gothic fairy tales. And the fairy tale I'm referring to, it's called Dwarf the Nose. And it's about a boy who was had to accompany a rather ugly old woman carrying her bags that she bought vegetables from his mother's stall, and she'd taken him to her very strange house, and who looked very derelict and unpleasant, but inside it was absolutely magic, with little strange animals and birds, etc., etc. And she fed him a wonderful soup, very, very delicious soup. And he fallen asleep. And he had a strange dream about being a servant to this lady. And then he woke up. The house was empty. The room was strangely stripped of any niceties that he had experienced in his dream. And he come back to his town, to the center of town, to the marketplace, and everyone was laughing when he was passing by. Because, I don't know, to cut this long story short, he turned into an ugly dwarf, and his nose reaching the floor. And it turned out that he spent not 7 hours, as he thought, kind of long sleep, in a long dream. But I don't remember, it's about 20 years. And that's this plot. It's all about, I don't know, Rip Van Winkle, that is about more or less the same. It is about a person who lives in a kind of dreamland, and he's stuck in his past. And then he wakes up, and it turns out that the country that he left is actually totally changed, that the people whom he had left, they don't recognize him anymore. And that's the one of the myths, I think, that I'm constantly haunted me throughout these 47, almost 50 years of my, you would like to say exile.
Well,
exile.
Just,
it's a very comfortable exile it was for me, you know.
well, I mean, I can see that you return to this dwarf long-nose fairy tale. It's contained in this little book, History Thieves, that was published by Index on Censorship, in fact, in 2010.
And Seagull books.
Yes, and also, in fact, let's get the plugs in now. The story that Zinovy's talking about is contained in One Way Ticket collection, which is available downstairs to everybody here. And I was intrigued by some of the things you said about that time in History Thieves, and particularly concerning your Jewish identity or lack of it.
Oh, yeah.
You say, we never learned about Moses or Jesus. I never heard a word of Yiddish or Hebrew spoken at home. I never went to a synagogue. I never saw a Bible. But then you nevertheless had your Jewish identity on your identity card, and you were nevertheless aware of it in some ways. So could you perhaps just tease that out a little bit about what it was like to grow up in the Soviet Union as a Jew, identified as a Jew, but not really knowing what that meant? It's intriguing to me.
Can I pick up from the other end? That is, I think this is the first time I felt that that what I'm going to face is a kind of rather complex relationship with one's past, everyone who's left his own country. And another thing is that you immediately stereotyped. You're constantly labeled as something. In a way, I was totally ignorant about Arab-Israeli conflict, but I felt something. It doesn't matter at this stage. It's a different subject. But what I'm going to say is that I enjoyed it absolutely completely, my time in Israel. Absolutely, it was a hilarious time, and I was doing theater. I've been traveling around the country, and it's and as I said, I spoke Hebrew in about 6 months, quite okay. So it was totally enjoyable. But the question is, why? Why did I leave? Why did I come eventually to Britain? The thing is that after a year, I wrote this notification, the short novel, and I immediately was labeled as anti-Semite, anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist pornographer.
I'm glad I didn't write that in the introduction.
Because there is some kind of sex, which is in this novella, sex scene, which wouldn't have been unheard of for the Russian literature process at that time. I mean, it was absolutely outrageous, and that's what people picked on. But it's this anti-Zionist is because I said that. I mean, the character that emerging is clearly dead. He's working for a mysterious agency, writing letters in the name of husbands who already died in Israel, but the letters are sent to their wives who are left behind, and since I've been writing letters, almost 3 a day, to my friends in Moscow, it is not accidentally that I came up to this idea of mysterious agency. But anyway, that's all this. Immediately you are labeled. You are labeled one way or another. You are stereotyped. And then since it's been this short novel, was immediately bought by a big French publishing house, Alban Michel. And then they eventually they published 3 of my next novels in French translation before they even been published in Russian. So it was a kind of success. So immediately the establishment immediately drawn me back. I met a number of all kind of representative of literary. What I'm saying is that immediately I was declared to be a Jewish writer. And I didn't like it. I don't know why. I mean, I'm not anti-Semitic, as you can imagine. I didn't like to be called a Jewish writer because I was writing in Russian, quite proudly so. And so to be called Jewish writer in what sense? Because my ethnic origin is Jewish, is not enough. It's not enough. I've written now, just finished, a long essay about Ukrainian origin of Gogol, about it's actually an essay about Gogol and how his Ukrainian past and Ukrainian ethnic origin haunts him and haunted all his life. And it's just, you realize that you're tagged with a label which is, you feel uncomfortable because you have to follow a certain pattern of behavior that you are not actually prepared to, and you are unwilling to follow.
So can I ask you then, how would you describe yourself? Or do you think these labels are just not useful at all? Are you, well, at that stage, did you consider yourself a Russian novelist? Or do you consider yourself a British novelist? Then and now. So when you were not wanting to identify yourself as a Jewish writer,
right?
Did you think of yourself as a Russian writer, or did you think of yourself as a wannabe British writer or a cosmopolitan writer? Or are these labels just not useful at all?
Well, I think it is absolutely useless because I don't know, nowadays especially. First of all, we live in the age of what's it called? Social media, internet, web. We don't exist in any particular country. Although it's not entirely true, I'll come back to it. But basically, a person lives in one country, writes in one language, but being published in another language. By the way, what kind of writer I am? What kind of writer was a person who in that time, in the 1970s, 80s, until the revolution in 1991, how you would regard such a Muscovite novelist who was lived in Moscow, but would be published all these works in England or in France or in the States, because that was the case in my time of my first years of emigration. I would I was absolutely stunned by the number of books that has been published in emigration. It was absolutely incredible. There were about 20 magazines published in Tel Aviv, even more of them in New York. France, Paris was traditionally kind of country of emigres, would publish in Russian, I'm talking about, publishing house. But immediately you would realize that I came from the totalitarian Soviet Russia. But what I faced immediately is an incredible division between an emigre establishment, Russian I'm talking about, emigre establishment and emigre dissidents. You asked me, was I a dissident in Russia? I was not in a proper sense of it. although I was, I don't know, slightly persecuted, slightly chased by the KGB, etc., I never faced any life-threatening situation. But there in so-called exile, I immediately felt that I don't belong to a magazine who is run by people like, I mean, they were, I wouldn't go into, for this audience, into all these emigre squabbles, but by a magazine that it was run by people influenced by Solzhenitsyn in a most horrible, unpleasant way, because Solzhenitsyn had started to show his leanings towards certain conservative, nationalistic, towards tendencies, conservative tendencies, and immediately you have to choose between being published by a big magazine and being well paid, and they paid well, or to join Sinyavsky, so-called emigre samizdat, who published a new magazine as an opposition to this an established edition. His own magazine, which was a kind of printed and published on his own money, because he taught in Sorbonne at that time, and was well paid. And but it didn't pay any author's fees, etc., etc. And I've chosen this one. I don't know why, because probably I was of very conservative views. But what I'm saying is that you immediately had to choose, and you immediately would be labeled. But it was a different time also, because we are talking about time when books mattered, actually. I mean, books were tools of the Cold War. I was a part of the Cold War machine. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, just to think about those times. It's amazing that, for example, in I don't remember, 56, for example, it's all started. When Pasternak published his Dr. Zhivago, he was accused, of course, of treachery, and he was the enemy of the people. But some Muscovites, patriotic Muscovites, not patriotic Muscovites, ordinary Muscovites were bussed to Luzhniki Stadium. It's about 15,000 or something, were gathered for the purpose of accused Pasternak publicly en masse, so to speak, in being the enemy of the people, which is absurd. He published a book. Who cares? But it's wonderful. I mean, could you imagine? I mean, it's just 15,000 say that you have written a terrible book. What is wonderful is that at the same year, T.S. Eliot, actually, absolutely the same year, I think it is, I don't remember where did I read it. I can, anyway, it's a reliable, what I'm saying is good, could be checked. At the same year, T.S. Eliot had to perform in the States. Initially, he had to, I don't know, I think it was Harvard, sort of ordinary like this, a kind of common room, common teacher's room. Yes. And then they decided, they felt that it is a kind of rush to hear him. They changed the size of the auditorium. Then they changed it again. It ended actually in the stadium. And it was about 15,000 actually present.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely amazing. I mean, yeah. Books mattered. Why books mattered? They've been tools of the Cold War. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. It is no wonder if 15,000 accuse Pasternak's Dr. Zhivago, why not to use it? So CIA, actually, I mean, it's a known fact now, they were subsidizing the publication of emigre magazines.
Indeed.
So I don't know. Indeed, it was a good good thing. All behind this CIA initiative.
Some say they were subsidizing index on censorship, but we'll come
Well,
to
they
that another.
definitely subsidized the encounter to which I contributed.
And that's not true, by the way.
No? Well, Kessler says that it's actually the Congress for Cultural.
Of course.
Yes. It was paid by his money from his.
I think there is an element
no,
of that.
from royalties of the state.
I want to come to the present situation, but
Yes,
first
indeed,
I'd like to talk to you about a little bit about the world of the mushroom picker, because.
It's been 40 years ago.
This is a world just before the fall of the Iron Curtain, really. This extraordinary world of, I guess, British left-wing fellow travellers, people that thought that it was cool to be into the Soviet Union, and you portray this world beautifully. You were clearly taken with this particular tendency within the British intellectual left. And I'd be fascinated to know what you thought when you first came here and you encountered this particular kind of, I suppose, trendiness of the left and its attraction towards all things Soviet.
Well, it was in '86, I think. It was the first version was published, and it was absolutely amazing time for me. I was again in shock because I had a friend, Alex de Jong, his wife, studied. It was in Slavonic studies in Cs. No, she wasn't Slavonic studies.
In Oxford.
No. Alex de Jong was teaching in Oxford, but his wife was studying in, I don't remember, in either King's School, I don't remember. But anyway, in one of the London universities. She would come back home, Alex told me, in tears every day because she was terrorized by fellow students. She was bullied for being an American. She's an American. I mean, it was very tense time, really, and I couldn't believe that quite intelligent, reasonable, rational people could believe that the Soviet Union is not very much different from the United States. And since the United States is providing missiles to be located in Greenham Common, they are more immediate enemy than the Soviet Union. I think aphoristically, Solzhenitsyn, whom, as I said, I didn't sympathize, he said absolutely wonderful, very witty, he put it in a very witty way. As you remember, just the slogan of the time was better red than dead. And he's rightly remarked that lobsters are red when they're already dead. And it is just that people imagine that that this kind of Soviet oppression is just one of those variety of the war in Ukraine. They would say,
what is they
well, yes, it's a nasty
but they can do business with you.
No, you
cannot.
You
cannot.
Simply because
he's unmanageable.
And he's unmanageable
because he's a KGB
thug. And you cannot deal with a KGB thug. And when you turn the country into a mafia state, you cannot actually live there without being involved in this mafia business. Because if you, I don't know, you can bet a what's
Better Call
Saul. Better Call Saul.
I don't know if you have watched this
soap
operatic
serial.
It's a mafia business. I mean, just mafia business. And it's just at that time, people were talking about,
well, it's just censorship. I mean, that's the logic. I mean, it's a repeated logic of, well, they have censorship, we also have censorship. Well, they have, they chase dissidents, they put them in prison. Yes, we do too. No, it's not the same. Not the same.
I have no reason to believe that you saw it, but I happened to switch on the United Nations Security Council hearing today, where we had the spectacle of Roger Waters, the former member of Pink Floyd, being called by the Russians as an expert on geopolitics to talk about the situation, which reminds me of, I mean, it's exactly what you are talking about. It's this idea that everything's the same, that yes, it may be bad in Russia presently, but there are bad things going on in the West as well. And in fact, the Russian representative to the United Nations Security Council made precisely the point that you're making here, that in fact the real censorship is going on in the West because only certain views are accepted. So I'm interested to hear that you can see those parallels between those times and these times. And I mean, again, going back to the question of identity, we've talked privately about your feelings about what happened after the invasion of the Ukraine. But could you maybe take me back to that time and how you felt as a Russian, as an exile, as a British citizen, you know, however you wish to talk about those identities and how you felt, but could take us back to that terrible time.
Well, there are a number of them. First of all, personally, it was disastrous for my name. As you mentioned, my family name is Glusberg. Now in passport, I have double-decker, Glusberg Zinik, Zinovy Glusberg Zinik. But my pen name is Zinovy Zinik. So very frequently, I would sign off my letters with double Z. I cannot do it now. So I've lost my name again. More than that, I probably would be remembered in London, not for my novels, peculiar novels, but for the a drink that I created. I used to work for Pushkin House, and there was a wonderful tavern called PJ's, run by a fantastic barman, Tony, who knew all kind of languages, because 33 or whatever language services from Pushkin House would cross the road to Covent Garden and come to his bar. And we become friends, and he always would ask what I would like, and I basically all my life been a whiskey drinker. But vodka, I love vodka in a Russian way. You drink a shot and then a bit of something salty as an after. A kind of like a tequila way of doing things. And then I had terrible hangover, and I wanted a shot of vodka, but there was nothing to swallow after that. So I invented a drink with the help of Tony, and it is a it is a whiskey glass, a tumbler, double ice, double vodka, and double lime, 2 chunks of lime squeezed into it, and then shaken or stirred, or shaken or not stirred. It is absolutely delicious. If you taste it, you think that it's a very complicated cocktail. And with Tony, we decided to call it Double Z, because Zinovy Zinik, you know. And then it started actually spreading all over the town, actually. because people would go and say, double Z, please. And the barman, you know barmans, they like to know absolutely everything. And I said, yes, of course, yeah. What is that? And they learned quite quickly. But now, yeah, I cannot ask double Z because they would be
You'll have to rename it.
like, yeah, so it's just
Maybe the goggle.
They killed my reputation, you know. So no double Z signature, no memory of the best cocktail I invented. And then there was a personal story. I don't know, it's been published in the Index. It's about my granddaughter, Lucia, who never been to Russia. Her father is, late father is Yorkshireman. Mother is half Slav, half Jewish. But she never been to Moscow, to Russia in general. But because me and my wife Nina and Margarita, who speaks fluent Russian, we spoke to her. She speaks Russian without any trace of any accent. She's absolutely pure Russian. It's a kind of miracle, a real miracle. And in late 90s, there was talk in the family just probably to go to Moscow finally to visit it. And because Lucia was learned Russian, she saw all kind of films in Russian. I mean, she's absolutely very versatile in Russian. So she created in her mind a certain Russia, I presume. It's very difficult to describe, because we do invent countries which we never visited in our lives.
But a romantic Russia.
Yeah, kind of Russia. She's here, so we can ask her. Actually. And then she come back from school in tears because she was shown what's it called, the newsreel of what Russians did in Ukraine. And it was a destruction of this dream about Russia. It was destruction, a kind of destruction of a national identity in a way. So, so that's the crime, I think. That's the, I called it, it's abuses of language in a way. And of course it had a disastrous effect on Russian literature and on Russian intelligentsia in general, because, do you want me to talk about it?
Well, I would like you to, what I'd like you to address is this question of, you know, the question of the boycott, really, of what the Ukrainians are asking for, almost an erasure of Russian culture, and understandably so, from their position, but you know, very difficult, particularly in light of what you've just said about Russian literature, Russian art.
Being a novelist and nagaist, I would say that it's actually raised my reputation among Russian readers enormously, because now masses of my readers actually migrated here, I mean, to the West, including editors and some publishers. So the subject of all my novels are about a person in between. He's got his past that he's left behind, and he's got his strange present that it's haunted by all kinds of stereotypes and memories, etc., confusions, confused identity, etc. So this subject matter become again very much topical, because masses is about, I don't remember, I don't know, thousands and thousands and thousands of members of the Russian intelligentsia migrated to the West. So now it is interestingly, before in the 70s, authors were incarcerated, so to speak, behind the Iron Curtain. Their books were published here. Now it's something strangely opposite. their editors, their publishers are there actually, but editors and authors themselves are here. So, but that's a kind of personal aspect of it. But a general aspect of it, I think it was Isaiah Berlin that created this myth about the Russian intelligentsia as a small elite group of people who were persecuted by this horrible Stalinist machine, but they resisted. And it's actually, it was in a way true because I don't know, it was just during the trials and tribulations of during the Soviet rule, it was this particular elite who resisted it and created the movement of protest and recorded it and documented it, and Index on Censorship was created out of this process. But now it's clear during the last 20 years, it turns out that the Russian intelligentsia didn't somehow sustain this spirit of resistance to the power. They've been one way or another been cooperating. Those who couldn't, and they started to feel their complicity in the business, they again started to leave again. Even those who went there initially tried to come back after the revolution. And then finally they realized that it's this mafia machine, mafia connections, this pattern of life makes everyone accomplice. And this destruction of this Russian intelligentsia myth is really a kind of tragic. As to the boycotting Russian literature, I mean, it's absolutely stupid. I mean, of course, it's idiotic. I don't know. It's just a personality of author could be absolutely abhorrent, but his work, in whatever language, could be uplifting and elevating and enlightening. I don't know. As you can. I don't know. It's just I'm Wagner. I mean, was notorious scoundrel and anti-Semite, etc. But when you hear overture to Tannhauser, you're flying. I don't know. You're.
Can I'm going to open up for questions in a moment, but would we like to hear just a brief piece of Zinovy's writing, perhaps? I think we would.
Oh, well,
yes. Yeah. Okay. So would you like to read a little bit from the story from?
Do we need it?
Do we?
I mean, the problem is that I have when I read, my accent become even heavier. So if you can live without it, I would rather skip it. But
okay, fine.
But
let's keep a conversation going. Okay,
yeah,
that's fine.
Yeah.
In that case,
sorry,
we are open to questions. If anybody in the audience would like to begin, gentlemen here, do you want to say who you are and
Sure, I'm Roland. I'm a journalist. You talked about the encounters with British fellow travelers and the false equivalences they draw. You must have come up with various strategies over the years to answer those false equivalences. What did you say to them? Did you ever get through to them?
Well, they were different. I mean, there are many different kinds. The attraction, I mean, it's all Jean-Jacques Rousseau problem. And people have different attitude to a kind of, to return to this idea of noble savage. And it's just there were people who physically seen in the life in Russia a kind of chaotic, wonderful liberation from the chain of civilization. In fact, it's been it actually was a fantastic time in the 70s at least, because the whole country was like a huge council estate, and nobody worked, and nobody actually was dying from starvation, because somehow you can manage, and you even manage to buy a bottle of vodka a day. So you sit at your kitchen, you I don't know, fry your eggs, and the salted cucumber, and dumplings, yes, dumplings, yeah, very cheap. And you talk about Nietzsche and Solzhenitsyn and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and just foreigners arrive, and their jaws dropped. I mean, who could have afforded it in the West to live like that? You've got to get up in 8 o'clock and to be in the office at latest 10 o'clock and to be there till 6, and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, duties. And you have to choose to buy this or that piece of cereal or whatever. You have to choose all the time. And there is no choice. Your spirit is absolutely free. And there is a double think. Oh, well, double think. Yeah, double think. I mean, there is a monologue in The Mushroom Picker. I mean, it's just now this novel suddenly become very topical because it's the same problems. And there is a passage there. I was sent. I didn't know. I'd forgotten about, in a way, about the content of it. And I remember the ideas, but I didn't remember that. I was just sent a piece of writing. It's about this bastard, this terrible character, Konstantin Foodie, who's actually a manipulator. He plays the fool, but he's actually a very sophisticated manipulator. He's talking about that the West developed this fission of the nuclear splitting atom, you know. That's material fission. But Russians invented more powerful weapon, which is just splitting the thought, which is just double think. And since they created the atom bomb of their own, plus double think, they're absolutely invincible, you know. And this double think, that would conquer the world, you know. That would be this is the most powerful weapon in the world. And that's very, very convincing argument. And you're a foreigner, you don't care. I mean, yes, they come and see this wonderful, beautiful life of conversation free of charge. But in fact, behind this is a misery. Behind this is a backknifing. Behind it is a queues, miles long. Behind it, arrests, actually, and torture. And even I, who was absolutely, I have too many friends who were in the key position in dissident movement. But myself, I was stupidly signed a letter of protest against the sacking, a friend of a friend. Now I wouldn't have done it because it was absolutely useless. And this person, I didn't like him. Eventually I met him in Israel. But I was sacked. I had a job and I was sacked. Well, they found another job for me very soon. But still, it's unpleasant. I mean, you basically, what's happened now, and that's people stop going there because it's expensive now, Russia. It's been cheap, like Paris in 1930s for Americans was cheap. Now they stopped coming, but they stopped coming also because they don't see this free-flying kind of conversation going around free of charge. Because people, for 70 years of the Soviet power, they become totally, the society has become totally disintegrated. People asking why people don't go, and there is no mass protest, like in girls in Iran. They are killed, and still they go and and demonstrate and en masse. And in Russia, hardly 200 people go into because they are suspicious of each other. Even friends, they don't know, they are not sure how the person would behave in case of if the pressure exerted. So people totally disunited. Sorry.
Another question. So does anybody? Right in the front. Was there another one?
Zinovy, very briefly. My name's James Woodall. I'm a writer and journalist. And just a comment and then a question. Comment is that the drink you invented sounds to me suspiciously like the Russian version of a caipirinha, which is a very famous Brazilian drink made with ice and lime. And I just wondered whether you've ever had a caipirinha.
No.
But
I'm ignorant.
So you can. Okay. I think we can reliably call you the inventor of a.
All right. Okay. Thanks for telling
It's complicated by the fact that in Brazil they also have something called caipiroshka, which is the same drink but made with.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's the comment. The question was really it's my ignorance, and perhaps other people in the room might not know this, but you referred when you were speaking to Martin about your Jewishness.
Yeah.
That you, on your identity card,
Yes.
you were in Russia
Yeah.
identified as a Jew.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That's a really open question because I find that rather sinister, but for perhaps rather obvious reason. Okay. That was my question.
Marsha is right. It's the called eternal passport, but in fact it's ID card. Paragraph 5 is known as your ethnic origin. Nationality. They call it nationality, but in fact it's ethnic origin. It's not citizenship. It's ethnic origin.
And what was the thinking behind that? What was the idea? Why was that so important?
I think it was very. I don't know. It is probably again. It came from the West, so somewhere. I don't know, because it wasn't anti-Semitic kind of thing. It was a pre-revolutionary. Yeah, it's a kind of I don't know, keeping the statistic of the ethnic origins of the population, of nothing else.
Obviously, the context of this is the way in which Jews, after the Nuremberg laws,
Yes.
Nazi Germany, had to be identified with J eventually.
Yeah. But I think, yeah, I see. No, it is a powerful parallel, but I don't think that it's actually related to any idea of persecution. It was a tradition of recording. Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Sorry, weren't there academic institutes that you had no chance of getting into if you had
Right, okay.
5 as a Jew and other kind of...
Just in the States, there were quarters about Jews in you couldn't get to Harvard or Princeton. Yes, no, in America particularly, because NYU was created exactly because Jews were not accepted by Ivy League universities in the States. And in the Soviet Union, it was there. I don't think that it was anti-Semitic, actually. It was this idiot scientist deciding that one should manipulate the ethnic present in... yeah, but they were...
When I was getting, when I was getting my first passport...
Sorry, do you want to say who you are?
I'm a journalist. I used to lived in Russia and in Britain, and well, I'm back in Britain now. When I was getting my first Russian internal passport, and the woman in militia who was issuing it, she asked me, what nationality do you want me to write in your passport? Because my father was Jewish. It said so in the certificate, birth certificate. My mother was Russian for some reason. And I said, well, I don't know. She said, I suggest you're right. You have Russian. And
Yeah.
she knew what she was talking about.
No,
Yeah.
of course. But can I tell you a funny?
It's Kate Braithwaite. I'm a friend of Zinik's, and it's absolutely true because Kirill, remember Kirill, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
His family, his name was Bricker, right? But his mother's name was Osipov, and they all used Osipov because it was just going to be more convenient than being called Bricker, right?
No. This is what I'm saying.
So, and this was, this was in the 90s. They were using the name. I mean, obviously they changed it. I imagine when the children were born, but this is quite recent times, and it's just a convenience not to be Bricker.
But can I tell you my own story? Because and it's all funny in a way. Yes, it depends on the period of in the Soviet Union, and indeed since 1960s and until recently there was a quarters, but sometimes it was different, and even quarters were played with, because one of the there is no collection, this Russian collection, which we celebrate today in a way, the edition. And this Russian collection of short stories, by the way, I've forgotten to say great thank you to Irina Prokhorova, head of NLO. It's a wonderful, big, independent publisher under the threat now in Moscow, who published this fantastic collection of my short stories. It's 40 years of covers, scans, 40 years of my life. And it's 700 pages, but it's edited in a very readable pages, beautifully done. And it's still light in weight and hard, and it's a fantastic edition. And of course I have to thank you, Martin, for finding this story, which was written in English originally, this his master's voice, for Index, and because of that, this evening is taking place. So what I was saying is that, and Index, I don't know, is Jemima? Jemima?
No, she's on her way to California, I'm afraid.
Anyway, that's the editor-in-chief of Index I have to thank too for organizing it all, and everyone involved. But coming back to this collection of short stories, there is a story there about me, narrator. It is a story should be translated, the title, as a draft dodger, because I was a draft dodger in Moscow. It's one of my crimes. It is just when they find out that you're going to want to emigrate officially, there was a period when they tried to enlist you into the army, and then you would get the security code, which would prevent you officially to go outside the Soviet Union. So you would be officially banned from migrating. So I was hiding away. It was a wonderful time I had in one of the friends' flat the whole entire month. And I was, eventually I avoided persecution because it was a court case was opened. But because of my problems with my spine, I got a relief from the duty, so to speak, and a job, and that's been used as an excuse for not turning up at home and not being eventually drafted. But what I'm saying is just in this story, it's the base of it is totally documentary, but the plot is totally invented, and some characters are invented. And one of the characters is my personal friend called Valand Rod. He's the son of Valand Rod Sr., who was an American black actor who in 1930s visited Moscow and realized that the Soviet theater needs a black face. So he stayed on, which is a wonderful story in itself. And his son born in Moscow, in the heart of Moscow, next door to me, next to Bolshoi Theater, actually. And he played absolutely a foreigner. He would jump the queue because he was a foreigner. He used it in any possible way. He didn't know a word of English, but he started to sing the songs of the blues, actually, because it was regarded as a song of enslaved black minority in the United States, so it could be used in the Soviet Union. Anyway, he had a fantastic life, but the problem was that his mother was Jewish. He was totally black. I mean, he was in the black side, sorry for saying this, when he was born, but his mother was Jewish. So one day he wanted to avoid the army draft. Everyone had to go after when you were after 17 if you didn't study at high school, so you could be drafted. So he went to the militia, local militia office to get his passport, his first passport. And the militiaman asked him, what's your nationality, that is, what your ethnic origin? And he said, I'm Negro, they said. Sorry for using N-word. He said, he writes it, Negro. But I'm also Jewish. He looked at him. A Jew. So he had turned out to be Negro Jew. And he went around it, and of course, he was absolutely, nobody wanted to touch him. But still the army wanted to put hands on him. He went to some kind of high-positioned colonel in the army, and he said, actually, my father was American. So this Negro is a dirty word. I'm offended. And she just, what do you want? He said, well, I wanted to put my ethnic origin American. So it's got in his passport, I saw it, American Negro Jew. And of course he wasn't drafted into any army. He said, go see Hermitage, Tretyakov Gallery, you're a foreigner. So he was a born Muscovite, untouchable by any authorities. He's still alive.
Well, that's the most extraordinary story. I've never heard that before.
But it's in one of my, the one of the stories in the collection, what I'm saying.
I mean, do we have any more questions? If not, okay, sorry, go on. I know who you are.
I'm Lucy Ash, I'm a journalist. I was really interested in what you were saying about this divide in the 70s between Sinyavsky's journal and Solzhenitsyn's one. And I just wanted to know whether there was a time when you admired Solzhenitsyn and thought that he would be a positive force in Russia, or whether you never thought that. I just wanted to understand the way your thought developed.
Look, I still am probably, but I was a young snob in literary speaking in Moscow. And I became even more so when I left. It was, I didn't write prose. I started writing fiction when I left, which I unexpectedly, because I thought that I'm just choosing freedom and I'm emigrating. I don't know what's going to happen. But what I didn't like, it's just I was a bit dabbling in experimental prose of my mentor in Moscow, who was he was sitting in a cafe, and there were a group of people who would attend this Café Artistique opposite Moscow Arts Theater. And they would, it was a wonderful conversation, and he would, using the bits of conversation and making a pastiche out of it. And it's a very funny, abstract prose. It is like closer to William Burroughs' cut-ups than anything, but it's much more funny, and it was very infectious because you feel that you can do the same. So I was doing the same for a while, imitating this style. And of course Solzhenitsyn, which was an epic realistic prose, I would, well, everyone was definitely in awe about Gulag Archipelago, but I found I couldn't finish the cancer ward, simply couldn't finish. I mean, it's unreadable to my mind, you know. And then, but that's sort of aesthetical kind of rejection in a way. Although Gulag Archipelago is definitely a powerful monument to the whole thing. Although but even then, my group of snobs would regard it as the monument for foreigners to see, because we knew everything. You know, why should we read all this? So that was the bit, a kind of dubious attitude. But then when he was exiled, he was a real exile, unlike me. When he was really exiled and built a kind of prison around his estate in Vermont, he started, I mean, things that he started to say were a bit suspicious to me. I mean, you would call it right-wing conservatism, but I wouldn't call it, because every person from Russia is instinctively right-wing, because the word of socialism, it's like a red clothes, I don't know, to the bull. But he was more than that. It's a kind of, it's a nationalism of a kind which is definitely put me off. But that was a process. It wasn't just immediate rejection. But people would disagree with me. I don't know. It's just my personal attitude.
First, person at the back.
Thank you. I am a student. I'm finishing a degree in international relations this year. My name is Lisa, and I wanted to ask you a question about the future of the intelligentsia that is now left in Russia. So, as we know, there are many people who have left. There are people who are still there, who, in their minority, choose to continue fighting, in a sense. I'm talking about predominantly young organizations, like, for example, Doxa, Feminist Resistance. I'm not sure if you know of them. Of course, the Helsinki Watch as well. Do you think they can form, as you said previously, do you think they can be in active opposition to the government? Do you think they can just not be passive, but be active as an intelligentsia group? Is that possible in the future?
I straight away can tell you I cannot answer this, because it's a very difficult question. I don't know. I don't know. First of all, I haven't been. The last time I visited Russia was 2012. So it was 10 years ago. It is not that I didn't follow what's happening, but I don't know to what extent. I mean, it's just by the look of it, to judge by what as far as I can judge, as I know, there is no chance now, absolutely no chance whatsoever to resist this power. It is a total, I'm having totally pessimistic view of it. But I always been wrong, on the other hand. I thought that the Soviet Union would exist until, 2084. But somehow it's collapsed. But on the other hand, as I said, disintegration of those literary circles, which was the bread and butter and was a lifeline for the intellectual life in Russian cities and villages even, that's gone. But poetry survives. It's amazing. Poetry survives. People still get together and perform in auditoria of 100 people, and people come and listen. In cafes. Yeah. And it's a poetry survives. Since and my close friend, one of them, Mikhail Eisenberg, is totally politically inactive, but he still writes. And To what extent it would bring some kind of change, I don't know. But the problem with these sort of pro-Putin masses is that they are not they're mass created, but they consist from real people who absolutely disappointed in so-called Europe, which they invented. I mean, they invented a certain outside world which they regarded as a paradise. They came here, they did a bit of shopping, they realized that it doesn't... Turkey. Anyway, they said, what is that? We thought that it's paradise. You have to work from 9 to 6 to 5, and it's just what you... I don't know, there is no vodka drinking, I don't know, it's just... I don't know, they didn't understand anything, basically. And they become seriously disappointed in this so-called West. And the aggression of a person disappointed is so powerful and is so stubborn that they see in the existence of the entity like Ukraine an enemy simply because they wanted to join, didn't want to join us. If you are not with us, you are our enemy. And that's a very serious problem. I don't know how to mend it, but it is very serious because it's a psychological problem of the inferiority complex. And it's very, very difficult to fight the inferiority complex. It's almost impossible unless you get published and suddenly become a famous writer. You know.
We saw there are 2 more questions, and then we'll have to end. I mean, we did see today, I think Novaya Gazeta and Memorial in court in Moscow, and I don't know whether that's a terrible, depressing thing or a sign of optimism and a sign that people are still fighting. But we shall see how it turns out. So I'll take the question of the lady in the cream top first, and then at the back.
Can we also take one question from a person online, if you do not mind?
Yes.
So the question is, can you say something about Zinovsky or Zinovsky Turds? Probably they're asking it about your comment about Solzhenitsyn. So what role did Zinovsky play in your milieu? And then they explain, can you talk about him and his writing?
Immigrant?
About Zinovsky.
Right. But it's a big question. I mean, what...
Well, should we take these 3 questions?
About Zinovsky, in what way? As
a writer, as an intellectual, so what was your perception?
I mean, it's one of the most brilliant writers in Russian of the 20th century. I don't know whom to compare him. I mean, he's absolutely brilliant. And he was very, very, very amazing character because he found a spiritual strength to resist this very powerful emigre establishment outside Russia and set up his own magazine. That's how a free person behaves. He didn't fight the enemy. He created his own a little empire. And I liked it. And they were stylistically, they're absolutely superb. And we are, my generation at that time, were absolutely lost because we didn't have any, this free world, but actually there was no place for new prose to find a publisher. And he turned out to be the one. He first published authors who were, if not banned, but definitely rejected by all big established magazine in Russian that existed outside Russia at that time, in New York, in France. So there was nothing in England. So he created I don't know, people like Limonov, who was persona non grata at that time, he published him. He started to publish dissidents outside Russia. And he published me first. I don't know, the mushroom picker, the original Russian version was published in his printing house.
Well, we have only about 5 minutes, so should we take the last two questions?
Thank you for this talk. I just wanted to ask you a few things about you said in the protest movement that 200 people show up to protest there, but I just wanted to say that I was there and it's more than that, and there was thousands and thousands of people. I think that the issue is more that the mashtab of the of the government is too quick to crush it now, and that's what was harming those movements. And I don't think that it's a lack of people wanting to go. But another question behind that is, if we are based here and we are artists here and we make theater and we make literature and we make film about these things here, what is the role, in your opinion, of an artist today who is based outside of the country, but they really disagree what's happening inside of it? And what kind of effect do you think we can have now?
Great question.
You mean what politically the person should do? I don't know.
As an artist?
As an artist, you should create art that basically tells the truth. But that's a very general formula. I mean, it's very difficult to say. I mean, it depends on the artist. It has to produce something that it's changed the minds of the people. But it's not it's not a slogan under which I personally work. I hope somehow throughout my long monologues, I'm driven by certain myths in my life. I don't know, like Hansel and Gretel, apart from this fairy tale about Dwarf the Nose, which is reinterpreted all over again, and sometimes it hits the bigger audience, but sometimes it just helps me to find a form for my inner chaos. I'm really not a political writer. I have my complexes and chaos. I mean, God's sake, I'm 77-year-old now, and it's too much in your past that it piles up. But when I was 20-something, it was the same chaos, and I still deal with it. And only when you find a shape to it, you can go on living. That's how my mind works. I really cannot live without setting all my perversive, evil, kind, revelatory thoughts packed together in my mind. I have to find the shape, but that's what writers do. And I think that because of that, they're very egotistical, probably. They're trying to find a shape. Sometimes it hits the general audience, and you become popular, like this novel, for example, The Mushroom Picker. But sometimes it doesn't. So you have to be true to yourself and to know how to write, basically. That's the only advice I can give. Politically, I don't know. Jan Palach did self-immolation.
Don't do that.
I don't know. It's very, very difficult. I'm sorry that you are right about the 200 people. You're absolutely right. I don't know. I remember, if you remember how many thousands of people came out in Russia, in Moscow, at the time when when it was the attempt to return the country to the Soviet Union, when Yeltsin came to power. Thousands, I mean, suddenly you see absolutely free country, masses, because they were not afraid and they were united. They were not afraid of each other. when I'm saying 200, it is that people started to be afraid of each other. And because of that, they cannot create a mass movement. But as a writer, nothing. I mean, I've been teaching in Columbia University and in Wesleyan University. You teach creative writing, but it's very, very difficult. I don't know, I can explain I can resolve certain difficulties in writing a certain story, but I cannot give you a general advice. You've got to be attentive and trying to alert your mind what kind of shape actually fits the chaos which is in your head to shape it.
I just wanted to ask what your thoughts might be about the way in which people are now rereading Dostoevsky and Pushkin and saying that, you know, everything that was imperialist about the Russia that we see today and Ukraine is actually to be found in their works. And I'm thinking about this because of a recent article, I don't know if you read it, in the New Yorker by Elif Batuman, you know, who was, I think, had a transformation about how she now sees those works. What do you think of all that?
Yeah, well, it was the famous exchange of letters between Joseph Brodsky and Kundera about Dostoevsky, when Kundera said that he had to translate, I think, something Dostoevsky. And it was at the time when the Soviet entered Czechoslovakia. There was a Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia by the Soviet Union. And he said that he couldn't open Dostoevsky any longer at all. I don't know. I can. I mean, when you open the short story The Glasses by Henry James, there is an entire paragraph about Jews who invaded the beaches of Broadstairs with their long noses, and they are occupied. For God's sake, and I thought, well, so probably he would develop this subject. It's interesting. None. It's just a paragraph. He was sort of angry with the Jews of Broadstairs. I don't know why. You read horrible creation by Gogol called Taras Bulba. It's actually people talking about Alexander Dugin and I don't know, Heidegger, I don't know, all kind of crypto-fascist philosophers and thinkers, but in fact, it's all written there. The invasion to Ukraine, the ideology of it, it's all written absolutely to the minor ideological details in the idiotic novel by Nikolai Vasilievich Gogol, whom I adore. The Dead Soul, it's absolutely, I don't know, I adore, but nothing you can do, because he wanted to create something Ukrainian and patriotic towards Russia for his new Russian friends, Aksakov, Pushkin, etc., etc., and they applauded. And it's been studied, and there is a horrible description of pogrom there in Gogol, absolutely horrible. And in Taras Bulba, horrible, about Jews thrown by Cossacks into the river, and their legs are sticking out of the water, which was very, very funny, he writes. And then the massacres, to the detail, massacres of Poles by Cossacks, when the female breasts are cut. I mean, it's absolutely sadistic description of torture, and it's all by Gogol. What can you do about it? The answer I gave, it's about Tannhauser and Wagner, because the beauty is created by gods in human being invoke. And all bad is by parents, probably, you know. by your tribe. By your tribe. And that's going worse and worse, because if I would allow kind of speculative, theoretical insight, is that with the end of communism, Soviet communism, was the last universal teaching in the world, the last one. And with the collapse of communism, the universalism that existed, the idea, universal idea, had collapsed. And the people resort to tribalism, to nationalism, as the reaction to it. I mean, I'm talking about intellectual elites, like it had been after the collapse of Napoleon. Because Napoleon, with all this cruelty and mass murder that he created, he was the greatest universalist in the world. He gave, by the way, rights to the Jews, etc. He thought that he going to Russia to liberate it from tsars and from nationalism, you know. And then with the collapse of Napoleon Empire and the Napoleon ideas of globalism, we see the resurgence of nationalism in Germany, specifically. They immediately, there is Hannah Arendt, it's a fantastic book called Rachel Levin. She's written her PhD about it, about the salon, 18th century, end of 18th century, 19th century, by Jewess, called Rachel Levin. And it was attended by Goethe, by brothers Humboldt, and then with the collapse of Napoleon, nationalism, and it was empty. Nobody would come because she was a Jewish. So it's a tribalism, it's again on the, and because of this tribalism, people on one hand take Dostoevsky's and his anti-Polish nonsense and anti-Jewish nonsense to their heart as their ally, and others describe and decide to delete the whole Russian literature. I don't know, Paul Celan was writing in German. So what?
Okay, on that note, let's finish there. I'd like to thank you all for coming. Thank Pushkin House for hosting this. It's been great for me, fantastic education to me, and above all, thank you very much to Zinovy Zinik for talking this evening.
Thank you very, very much. And I want to thank particularly Denis, who organized this evening and managed to get the most obscure edition of my first collection of short stories, One-Way Ticket, from bookshops, and it's there. And this edition is actually part of my Russian collection, in Russian. Yeah, published by Tom Birchinov.
So, thank you everybody for coming. I just wanted to say that we are still open for another half an hour, so if you want to grab a drink, and maybe if Martin and Zinovy have some time, we could spend some minutes and converse unofficially. And please buy Zinovy's books downstairs, and please consider supporting us. We've left some leaflets on the seats with information how you can support us, and also you have the